Hello, I'm Virginia Stewart Taylor, and I currently work in the civil service as a trade negotiator at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I'm going to tell you a bit about my career to date and how the subject that I chose to study at university, which was languages, has helped me in my career to date. So I started off at school studying Spanish, and I did a Spanish to A-level. I also took Italian as a GCSE as an evening class because my school didn't offer it. And then when I started university, I took Spanish and Italian, and then added Portuguese into the mix as well. So I finished university, I graduated from the University of Exeter with a degree in Spanish, Italian and Portuguese. And that is actually quite easy to do because they're all quite similar languages. They're all Romance languages, and if you learn one, it makes it a lot easier and quicker to learn the others. French also falls into that category, so if you choose one of them, you're opening doors to learn the rest of them relatively easily. So that's what I did. I studied to become a linguist. I loved it. I loved my degree. I studied obviously the language itself. You also study the literature and the history of the country or countries where the languages are spoken. And there were also options to study film studies or gender studies, politics and translation and other kind of business Spanish as well. There were all these different options you could choose from. But one of the things I loved the most about my year abroad was, about my degree, was doing my year abroad. So I got the opportunity to go and live in Spain and in Italy. I was studying at a university in Spain for 6 months, and then I was working in an internship in Italy for 6 months. And there I got to really use the language, find out what it's like to live in another country, and that was something that really infused me as well. But what have I done with my degree since I left? So I said I currently work in the government, but I actually started off working for a Spanish company called Telefonica, which is known as O2 in the UK, and was directly recruited because I spoke Spanish, which is the language of the company outside of the UK. And this was brilliant because I got to travel with the company. I was visiting their headquarters across Europe, and I also spent 6 months working in Madrid where their headquarters are, and specifically using my Spanish. So there I had a real advantage because I was only I was headhunted because of the languages that I spoke, and that's a really fantastic way to fit your languages into your career, and it's a real USP, a unique selling point, because there aren't a huge amount of people in the UK that do speak other languages. So that really helped me establish my career straight after leaving university. What did I do since then? So I stayed at Telefonica for 4 years in total. I also took a sabbatical for 6 months, and so I went and worked in Nepal, actually, leading a team of volunteers on a development project. There I started to learn a little bit of Nepali, but the script is very different, and I wasn't there quite long enough to really become fluent, so I haven't added that one to the list of languages I speak. But it was a great experience all the same. And then when I came back from the sabbatical, I started a master's in European politics. So I had the languages and I knew a lot about the countries I'd been to, but I wanted to understand more about the political side of things because I wanted to move from the private sector into the public sector. So I did a master's in European politics, living in the Netherlands for 6 months and then in Sweden for 6 months. So again, adding to my to the list of countries and cultures that I've experienced, and that intercultural competence and communication, which is so important to the job that I have now. So I then came back from Sweden, and at this point had lived in 7 countries overall, and speak 4.5 languages. And the half language, so I've got English, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and I'm also learning French, which, as I said, is very easy to do when I speak the other ones, but I'm still not fluent yet because I haven't done any qualifications, I haven't done any formal courses, but I'm self-tutoring, as it were, and doing quite well with French as well because it's useful from a career perspective. I also, alongside my job for the last 8 years, have written a travel blog, which I started as a result of my year abroad at university. So I had learned a lot about living abroad and I wanted to share that and write about that. And I set up a website, which I taught myself to do just through Googling and basically reading tutorials, to set up a website and started doing some travel writing, which blossomed and turned into a side job, as it were, like a side gig. So I do occasionally earn money from my travel writing. I have had a lot of free trips where I go and review a destination, or a hotel or an airline will send me to a place to go and review their service. And that's been a fantastic hobby to have outside of my day job as well, which has also provided a little bit of income as well. So I like to think of myself as a multi-hyphenate, where you have lots of elements to your work and to the things that you do and the things that make your life a whole. But the main job that I'm doing at the moment is as a trade negotiator and trade policy team leader in the civil service. So how did I get into this career? So I had always wanted to join the civil service. I really resonate with the idea of having a real role in the way the world works and making life better for people. As I said, I started off in the private sector, and there you're working for profit and you're trying to generate money for the company. But really my passions lie in trying to make the world a slightly better place, or to be involved in world events that are really changing people's lives. So I'd always wanted to get into the civil service. It's not that easy to get in. I had to apply for several years to get in, and I kept persevering, and finally a few years ago was successful in getting onto the civil service graduate scheme, which is called the Fast Stream. And that is a programme where individuals rotate around different government departments. So I did one posting working on engagement and communications with British embassies. So I was talking a lot to our diplomats working out in British embassies across Europe, providing them communications materials and working with them to engage with their host governments, but also other UK nationals that live in those countries, for example. And that also involved quite a bit of travel, which is something I love to do with my work. So that was great. And I was spending time working with different embassies and meeting the diplomats and the people that work in those embassies, which is really fascinating. My next role was working as a policy advisor on trade sanctions, so more kind of trade policy. And there again, I got to travel out to Brussels to be part of different European Council meetings, and that was really exciting as well, from a multilateral diplomacy point of view. And then in my most recent role, I work on trade negotiations, both with the EU and with other countries around the world. And I currently lead a team. So I've been in the civil service now for 3.5 years and have seen 3 different government departments. And one thing I really like about working for the civil service is the variety of options. So the sheer number of different types of job I can do and posts I can move into, while still being under the same employer. And that's really encouraged and is something I really like in my career, having had all this variety. So you'll see that a thread running through my career is the kind of the languages and the international aspect. That's what I really enjoy, and I've found opportunities to do that. But as I say, I think it's I think languages was a great starting point for me, and it all started with having continued Spanish to A-level. You do need one language at an A-level in order to study languages at university, and normally that's the case. And that was a real springboard for me into the more international careers and experiences that I've had since then. So in terms of the role that I do now, so I've already mentioned that I like seeing an impact on real people's lives. I like feeling that I'm contributing to the way the world works. I also find it hugely exciting to see my work in the news and on TV, and people are talking about it and people know what I'm doing. Working on trade negotiations is very high profile, and there's a lot of debate about it, and it's something that I frequently have to engage with ministers on, or ministers are going into Parliament to talk about the trade negotiations I do, and so I have to prepare words and scripts for them to be able to say, and it's just really exciting to feel like you're part of something so crucial to the country and the world as it's developing. As I said, I'm really interested in diplomacy and working with different cultures and different nationalities. Working in negotiations is a great place to do that because I'm obviously talking to a negotiating partner who's from another country. They have different cultural backgrounds, different languages. At the moment, of course, I'm not travelling for my negotiations, but normally we'd be flying out to all the different countries around the world to do these negotiations, which again would be a great opportunity for me to see those places and to travel. So there is a lot of excitement, and that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what excites me about the job. I find that really interesting. And in terms of why I'm here, so I've mentioned that I found it quite difficult to get into the civil service. It's very competitive, and I don't want that to put you off because there are lots of routes in, whether that be without a degree, so going in as an apprentice, for example, that's possible, and starting with an apprenticeship in government, or there are also internship programs, or you can apply directly just to a job that you see advertised, or there are also graduate schemes, which is the route that I took in. And I think I'd pinned my hopes on the civil service for the first time when I was about 19, and I decided I want to work in a really international remit. I want to be able to travel, I want to use languages, I want to meet people from other countries. What is a really great employer that can do that? And as I mentioned, in the private sector, I did find a company that did that, so working in the technology industry, but it wasn't quite exactly what I was looking for, and I established that the government would be a really great place to get that international experience. So I applied and I didn't get in. I applied again and didn't get in. It took me several times. It took me 5 years, in fact, of 5 applications in total to get into the civil service fast stream. So if one thing I can recommend, it's persevere. If you get rejected from a job, obviously take half an hour to feel a bit upset and disappointed, and then get yourself back up and motivate yourself to apply for something else or find some other activity to do in the meantime, because all of the work that I did leading up to joining the government was useful. It gave me skills, it gave me experiences, it obviously gave me money because I had a job, and it allowed me to travel. So I was still adding other elements and other skills to my skill set, even though I wasn't in my dream job at the time, which all prepared me for finally getting into the government and being able to do what I enjoy. So if you have any setbacks through the way, don't see them as terminal, don't give up on that career path altogether, just try and find another way around. What can you do in the meantime that would be useful and help you obtain the same kinds of skills that will be good for you in the long run? So what does an average day at work look like for me? Well, at the moment, of course, we're all working from home, so it basically involves looking at a laptop screen. What I'm doing though is I spend, I'd say, half to two-thirds of my day in meetings, so I'm not really working alone. I have a team that work for me. I also have a wider team I work with, and I'm talking to people right across government, so in different government departments. I'm talking to lawyers, I'm talking to policy experts, I'm talking to senior civil servants, occasionally ministers, and then of course I'm talking to the negotiating partners, so other countries like or institutions like the EU or the Americans or the Australians, for example, and negotiating with them. And at the moment that's all online, but in a normal working environment, this would be either me travelling out to go and negotiate or them travelling to the UK to negotiate. And when we are all working in the office in person, I work in Whitehall, which is very exciting. So you're walking past Houses of Parliament all the time, and Number 10, and the Foreign Office, and all these amazing government buildings. And that experience of seeing politicians, ministers walk down the street, journalists and camera crews kind of chasing after them, it's really exciting, and it feels like you're really at the centre of things. And I'll be going, I often have meetings in different buildings, so I spend part of my day kind of walking between them and getting outside. So yes, a lot of meetings. There is obviously quite a lot of email traffic and work to be done in Word documents, spreadsheets, all of the materials that you need in order to be able to go into a negotiation. The main job of the negotiation is talking, but you need to have legal text prepared, and you need to have information at the tips of your fingers, at your fingertips. I also lead a team, so I have to. So I spend quite a lot of time working with my team, finding out how they are doing, what support do they need, and there is also quite a bit of time spent doing learning and development. So studying for different qualifications or for on different sort of training courses that are available to me as a civil servant. So I'd say it's very varied. I think that variety is something I enjoy the most. And the fact that I'm not working completely alone. I think I couldn't do that if I had to sit all day long by myself and just work without speaking to anyone all day long. That would just be really sad for me personally, because I like to work with people. So yes, you have to interact with a lot of people, or a lot of meetings, a lot of emails, but when we're allowed to work in offices, so normally there's a lot of interacting, a lot of walking around, a lot of meeting different people, and yeah, it's an exciting place to work. It can involve very long hours as well, so to be honest, there are peaks and troughs of work, so sometimes you'll be preparing for a negotiation and that you've only been given very short notice, and there are occasional sort of late nights that I have to work, and it can be stressful at times. I think that's fair of any job, to be honest, but the civil service is a good place to work for work-life balance. So there is a policy where if you work over the amount of hours you're supposed to, you can take them back at a different time. And the civil service is very generous in that sense, that it does allow you to. So it's not consistently long hours like some professions are. I know lawyers in the private sector, for example, have a stereotype of working all hours all the time. Civil service is better from a work-life balance perspective, for sure. But there are occasional late nights. But not really weekends, although there are jobs which can involve working weekends. So if you want to go into something a bit more in terms of crisis management, so if you wanted to work in the government but work on responding to crises, then they can happen day or night, weekend, weekday, anytime. So there's a huge amount of a variety of role that you can do. But for me personally, I'm a Monday to Friday, mostly a 9 to 5 kind of job. In terms of what I'd like to do in the future, so what are my career aspirations going forwards? So I'm feeling really happy at the moment with the area I'm working in. I'm working on trade negotiations, which is an integral part of diplomacy. I would love to get a bit more political diplomacy experience, maybe go and work in an embassy, for example. And there are lots of different roles in embassies that I could do. So you can work as a political diplomat, where you deal with different political issues and work with the members of the host government of the country that you're living in to resolve those. You can also work as a trade attaché, so you're there to try and promote British exports and British trade and support on trade negotiations. You can also work in the consular department, so this is where you're helping British nationals who get into trouble abroad. They also process things like visa applications and lost passports and things like that. That could be quite exciting work as well. So that is something I would like to do in future, and there are lots of different places around the world that I'd love to live, but luckily the government has embassies and offices in almost every country of the world, so that is one benefit of working for the government. Obviously when I worked in the private sector, I could move to the countries where my company had offices, which in my case was Europe and Latin America, but there weren't so many options outside of that. So if you pick a region, for example, if you say you want to work in Asia somewhere, you could try and find a Asian company that have offices in the UK and try and become employed by them, work for a year or so or more in the UK, and then ask to transfer to one of their offices. That's another route into working internationally, and allows you to use your languages and go abroad. On the topic of languages, actually, I chose Romance languages, European languages, which are relatively easy to learn compared to languages like Russian or Arabic or Mandarin or Japanese, and I know there's a lot more demand and a lot more interest for studying those much more exotic languages, and they are hard. They are really hard, and when you're assessing which languages you want to study, obviously you want to be interested by the culture. You obviously want to think hard about, do I want to live in that country or not? It's perfectly fine to learn a language and then actually just stay in the UK your whole life and use it there. And there are lots of options for people who do that. But it's worth thinking about what demand there is for the languages that you're choosing to study, for example. So to talk a bit more about the other types of roles you can do with a languages degree if you study languages. Some people go into teaching, and I did a part-time job when I was working in Spain, working as an English teacher. So I was teaching adults and also small children English, to get a feel for what teaching would be like. And it's really rewarding to see your students progress, but it's also, for me, a bit too tiring. It's really exhausting work, teaching. But I tried it out because that is a common option for people who study languages, and then looked into other things. Another option for people who study languages is translation and interpreting. So translation is where you're translating a written text into another language. Normally it'd be from a language into your native language, so in my case English. Or interpretation is where you're interpreting somebody's voice into another language, normally your mother tongue. And I have friends who do both. So one friend works as a interpreter for German football matches, I think. So he gets to go and watch all the matches and just interprets what the commentator is saying into English. And so he's doing his dream job there because he's using his languages and he's watching football, which he loves. That is a really exciting career as well, but it is very mentally taxing. It's very exhausting. So that's one to try out as well. See how you feel. I did try some translation as a voluntary project to also figure out whether I would like doing translation or not, and I really enjoyed the intellectual challenge of it, but it involves working working solo. So you're basically a one-man person, you're one-woman person, just translating non-stop. And I really enjoy working with teams and working with other people, so that's why translation wasn't such an option for me. But I am lucky and I found other routes into work that involves working with different people and using my international and intercultural language skills. So thinking about what the skills are that are crucial to the role that I'm in currently, and sort of in the international careers that I'm kind of pursuing. So I think adaptability is key. So when you're working internationally, there are always surprises. There are always things that are unfamiliar to you, whether that be different cultural traits or different communication styles or different ways of working that different countries have. So the ability to adapt on the spot and to stay calm and collected is quite important. And this is something that I've gained through living abroad. So when I've lived abroad, there are always challenges of going abroad. But by having had to face them, I've learnt how to cope with those kind of situations, and I've also learnt that I have the resilience and the ability to problem solve to get myself through those situations. So adaptability, resilience, I've already mentioned as well, and the ability to step outside of your comfort zone. And it can feel very it can be difficult going abroad because you might start off feeling very homesick and you might not know enough people there, or you might have a job there but you haven't made friends yet, for example, which is what happened to me. On a couple of occasions I'd organise a job and I'd go overseas and then I'd sort of hope I would meet people there, which I always did, but then the first few days you can feel a bit kind of homesick or a little bit of culture shock. And the best way to overcome that is just to embrace it and go into it, and then in 5 days' time you'll realise, I've overcome it, I can do that. Okay, and then in future you think, right, if I'm ever scared of this again, I've done it before, I know I'm going to be okay. So being able to step outside of your comfort zone is useful for any career, to be honest, but I do think having experience of living abroad and working abroad is a very good way to develop that ability to step outside your comfort zone. For anybody hoping to work internationally, communication skills are really important. So the ability to speak another language is obviously helpful, but also to be able to read body language and to be able to build relationships and to communicate effectively to others. That doesn't need to be public speaking. That's not what I'm talking about. It's the ability to get across cultural barriers and be able to work with other people. It's not just the same as working with somebody who's had the same upbringing or the same cultural upbringing with you, speaks the same language. There's a very different set of skills when you're trying to build a relationship with somebody who's had very different influences in their life. And communication is really important for that. I'd say another skill which is important for my role in the government is to be quite analytical and have policy skills. So this is the ability to understand the subject matter of what you're negotiating. So I work on intellectual property, which means I have to understand intellectual property law, and I don't need to be a lawyer, but I do need to have some basic understanding of how the policy works and to be able to analyse and make decisions about those policies. And those skills are something the civil service teaches you, so it's not something you necessarily have to study at school or at university, but if you can demonstrate an aptitude for analytical skills, that will help. Teamworking is obviously really important, interpersonal skills as well, so I've already talked about intercultural communication, but teamworking and collaboration is really important in the civil service. No one tends to work on their own. It's not like an entrepreneur where you're working in a little box by yourself. You're very much in a bigger engine, as it were, of I think it's 500,000 civil servants across the whole country. I work with a much smaller subset of that, but you get the picture. You have to work with other people, so teamworking is very important. And the final question is, what advice would I give to 15-year-old me when thinking about life after school? So when I was 15, I was keen to be a writer. I knew that I liked writing, and I wanted to be a journalist. I ended up through bad luck choosing the wrong A-level subject and couldn't do the English degree that I wanted to at university. And I fell into languages instead because I had chosen to do Spanish at A-level. And I have to say it was the luckiest, it was the stroke of luck, really, because that opened up so many other doors to me. And so my key advice for my 15-year-old self, or to you, would be to say that you should try and keep your doors open as much as you possibly can. Don't shut any options away. So try to give yourself the flexibility to be able to change your mind in future and move around, because we're all going to be working for many, many, many decades, and the way that the world of work sort of functions at the moment is that we don't sit in one job for 50 years and then retire. Thankfully, we move around, we change careers, we switch careers, which is something I've done. I've moved from the private sector to the public sector via a master's in the middle and a spell volunteering in Nepal. I've had so many different roles, and of course my travel writing, which I do alongside all that. So I think we will have very flexible portfolio careers going through our lives from now on. So I would say keep your doors open. I think another key point to mention there is also it's useful to save money. So once you get a job, it's obviously very tempting to want to spend all the money that you've got. But actually, it's so important to save money away so that when you then want to switch careers, you have the flexibility to do that. So I had the option to move from the private sector into a master's. So I was studying for a year, I wasn't earning any money, and I could do that because I'd been saving beforehand. So I gave myself that flexibility to be able to move and make a change and take a risk and a leap into a different career. The same with doing a sabbatical. So I went and took 6 months off unpaid to go and work in Nepal. And I was able to do that because I'd saved up money. So I would say saving for a rainy day, but also saving for those career switches that you might want to do, or saving for courses if you want to retrain, for example, like do a master's or do a different kind of diploma or qualification later on in your career. You'll need to have money for that. So just save as you go along, to give yourself that flexibility and that option to change, so that you're not tied into one career that you cannot leave because of money. Another tip I would give is to say that your network is your net worth. And that might sound a bit foreign at the moment when you're still at school, but effectively what that means is that the people you meet along the way will prove useful to you at some future point in your career. You don't know when, or you don't know why or how, but it's really important to foster those relationships and meet people. So try to be as curious as possible, attend different networking opportunities, attend different conferences, try to be inquisitive, ask people what they do, or if you see somebody you admire, ask them if you can have sort of like 20 minutes of their time to learn about their career and their job, and then build a relationship with them. And then who knows, in 2 years' time they might be looking for somebody to come and do an internship with them, and you'll happen to see that on their LinkedIn profile, and then you've already got a relationship and you can then jump into that. And there have been so many occasions in my life where somebody I've met 3-4 years ago suddenly is looking for has an opportunity they're offering, or has experience that they can share with me, which is useful for my career as well. So definitely invest in your network, because the people you meet are extremely helpful along the way. Another tip I would give is to always try to keep a growth mindset, and to keep growing and learning. So as I've mentioned before, we're going to be working for decades and decades and decades, and the skills that we need in the workforce will change during that time. Things that I learnt at school will probably be out of date. They probably are now already. Like, I've had to keep learning. And for example, I went back to university to do a master's 4 years after I finished my bachelor's degree, actually. And so you don't have to do all your learning at the start of your career, you can do it throughout. So keep trying to learn and look for areas that you need to develop and skills you need to learn, and find a way to do that. So a lot of employers will support you to go and do a part-time master's, or to do a part-time course, or will give you a year out to go and do a full-time course, for example. But you need to be identifying the areas that you need to learn about, and need to find a course and need to go and do it, or you need to find some way to learn those skills. So keep that growth mindset and keep learning throughout your life. Don't think that you're going to finish education when you hit 18 or hit 21 and then never go back to it. You'll need to be refreshing your knowledge as you go along. So I try and bear that in mind. And it's exciting, actually, to be honest, to have that variety. So I worked for 4 years, then I took a year studying, and then when I went back to work for 4 years again. That variety is something that I really enjoy and keeps me motivated. So having that variety and that ability to go back to study. I'm sure I'll study something again in a few years' time, who knows. And then my final tip would be to try and find something that stimulates you and that interests you as a career. And when I say this, I don't mean that the job you do has to be 100% fun all the time, because those jobs are really hard to find. And some people get them, but even your dream job, I'm sure, whatever you picture it being, will have some boring moments, or some sort of admin moments, or some stressful bits that are less fun than the really fun parts. So yes, you need to enjoy the career that you're in, because you're going to be doing it for 5 days a week for a lot of your life. I think it's something like 80,000 hours of our lives we'll spend working in total. So you want to find something that you enjoy, but it doesn't have to be enjoyable 100% of the time. There will be times that are more stressful, but at least if you're interested in the subject matter, that will help you get through that. So I would think about where your interests lie, think about what you're naturally good at, and try and brainstorm ideas and which career paths or which kind of organisations might allow you to get experiences of those things. So for me, that was, I wanted to have an international angle to my work. I wanted to travel and use my languages and meet people from different countries. I found options to do that in the private sector and in the public sector, and I tried them out. And I've, for the moment, settled on the public sector, but maybe I'll go back to the private sector in due course. I don't know. Yes. So that would be my advice. So stay flexible, don't shut any doors, keep them open, keep a growth mindset, save money to allow you to make career transitions at some point, and build up your network as well. So I hope that has been useful for you, and that you will consider studying languages, or at least if not studying languages, look into the different international career options that are open to you. And very good luck with all of your studies.